Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Remington Ramsey, and today's podcast is a little unique. We have another podcaster, another host from the Real Estate Uncensored podcast, Matt Johnson. Matt, welcome to the show.
What's up, man? Thanks so much.
So this is going to be a little unique because this original recording that we're about to share was actually you interviewing me, but there's a lot of similarities that from the listeners that you have in real estate and the listeners that we have. And we kind of talk about just what the similarities are to the people who thrive within the real estate community. So what's your little takeaway from what we talked about that people can get excited to listen to?
Well, it's really the common personality traits are really interesting, and how it goes back to the way that you were raised and some of the limiting beliefs and things that were instilled in you a long time ago, and how that kind of plays itself out in your real estate career. We also talk about why real estate is such an incredible business and what you can make out of it and the vision that it takes to get you there. So it was a super interesting conversation. You came armed to the teeth with like 3 or 4 really good bullet points of common traits of real top producers. And then I threw in some things that I've noticed because I've interviewed some of those same folks for, since 2014. So you and I have kind of been around the real estate space talking to nothing but really successful agents for going on 10 years now. So we're just sharing essentially the top takeaways that you and I both have. So it's a really fun, short, impactful conversation.
My challenge to anyone listening to this, because I know that there's people out there that think, like, it's just kind of like when you're sitting in church and you hear the pastor say something, you're like, that'd be really good for Tom. Tom needs to hear that. I want to challenge your thinking. And when you're listening to this, no matter if you're the top realtor or, just started yesterday, think about how these points apply to you and your business, and can you be better? And I think actually, we didn't talk about this on the show, but I'm going to talk about it now. I think one of the common threads between people who are growth junkies that make it to the top is they never stop learning. They'll go to a conference and sit front row and take notes from the guy who started yesterday because they believe they can learn. So that right there is a point we didn't get into, but I think if you apply that to the upcoming minutes, you'll get a lot more out of it.
Yep, agreed. All right, so let's drop into the conversation that was originally recorded for the Real Estate Uncensored podcast, but we're sharing it with you, the Real Producers podcast audience. Enjoy. Remington, we're going to talk about the common traits of top producers, real producers, the people that are selling the bulk and the majority of real estate around the country. You and I both have the amazing privilege to work with them and serve them, hang out with them. A lot of them we would count as friends. And so we're going to get into a lot of them not. Well, there's too many. It's not for lack of trying. We'd love to be friends with all of them. There's just too many.
No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. a lot of friends.
That's right. All right. So you've been hosting the Real Producers podcast for a while. You obviously had the Real Producers magazine for a lot longer than that. So you've talked to a lot of real producers, very, very top producing agents in markets all across the country. Now you get to do it every week on the show. So let's start with just some of the top line things that you notice. Obviously, people have overcome a ton of adversity and obstacles and a lot of challenges. Is there anything in terms of their personality, their grit, determination, anything like that, just in terms of overcoming the challenging side of the business?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, when we started to grow, there was one of one. So when we were interviewing realtors, I wondered if what they were dealing with was Midwest problems. And then as we grew nationally, my dad actually was writing for my magazine and started writing for these other ones. So I kind of got a glimpse of what everyone was dealing with on the coast and South. And then when we started our podcast, it was pretty clear that people are people and deal with all the same things. And it's mostly an internal thing just to scale. So when you asked me that question, I wrote a couple things down. The first one is get comfortable with no, be cautiously optimistic, and steal from the best. This is the first thing. I wrote down a bunch of other ones, but those are 3 things that just constantly, those are the first 3 that came to my mind and talking to top producing agents. And be comfortable with no is something that's come up for years in this business. And I just think about, I don't know what happens between the time you're a kid, because when you're a kid, I've got 3 under 6, and the amount of times I say no is unbelievable, but it does not faze them. And so something happens between the age of 6, 10, whatever, and the time we become adults where we get soft and we just cannot handle that. And we get very afraid of the upcoming no. And so whether in real estate or sales or whatever it is, just be comfortable with not everybody, and for me, typically I feel like it's not no, it's just not right now. And if I keep that mindset, I realize that I should never burn a bridge. I should constantly be thinking that this person, if I groom the relationship the right way, could eventually see me as someone they could either do business with or trust for other reasons. So that's the first one. Do you agree with that?
I do. And I'm curious just what your experience is, because I was, I was raised in church, and just with the mentality of don't make people uncomfortable. Like if you're making people uncomfortable, you're doing something wrong. And so I think that kind of carried over, and it hurt me in my initial kind of ventures into sales. And I had to unlearn a lot of that stuff in order to be better at sales. Did anything like that happen to you, or are you the kind of person that just doesn't get bothered by no's?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The church, well, it's funny. You said you were raised in the church. I was thinking Hunchback of Notre Dame, like you were ringing the bells, and we just watched. I said we have 306, so Disney's on the top of my mind. That is a crazy movie, by the way. When's the last time you watched that?
I don't know that I've ever watched it. I know the story, but not the Disney movie.
Watch it, and just like the amount of undertones of I mean, I'm not even going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't watched it in 30 years, because I just want you to go back and watch it. I don't know if this is the direction you're going, but the church can hurt people. I think people think that the church is a safe haven from all the outside world and like scary things. But to be honest, it's just as scary within the church, because it's all broken people. And so if you have a bad experience, you can kind of apply that to the church because the church is broken. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're raised a certain way, and it is not like it goes against your natural abilities to deal with things, so handling the word no, then absolutely that could be kind of people, even if you didn't grow up in the church, you could be scarred from past events, like limited beliefs from past events.
Yeah. And that's what I found a lot, is that and this applies whether you're talking about church or not, but just how we're raised by our parents has a lot to do with the limiting beliefs, and everybody takes all those limiting beliefs and childhood traumas into their career as a salesperson. And a lot of times that's actually the stuff that holds you back. And it's not the functional stuff of how many calls did you make, or how did you close that contract? Like, how did you handle that client? It's all the childhood stuff, limiting belief stuff that actually holds people back. So let's keep moving forward. So let's go to the next thing on the list.
Well, okay. So what you just said, I'm going to replace one, because cautiously optimistic is kind of self-explanatory. I mean, we could do it, but I really like this concept of AI because it's kind of like the hot topic right now. So what you just said about people being raised a certain way. Okay. So AI is on the scene right now, and you've got a battle between the people who say AI is going to destroy this country and people who think it's going to be amazing. And I think about like anytime there was a revolutionary thing on the market, the printing press, the automobile, all these things, and what the conversation around, automobiles, when you bought like a dozen horses, is, oh shoot, no one's going to use my horses now, I'm kind of going to lose. And then the printing press, like before the printing press, I don't know if a bunch of like monks just started like sitting and transcribing, and like that, there was 12 copies of every book or whatever, but you put people out of business at first, and then that new thing creates more jobs and more opportunities. So like with AI, if I'm an agent, and I can tell very quickly if this agent is going to be successful, whatever that means, successful for that person, but sustain something long term by how they feel about AI. If you've got an agent that is like, wow, this is going to do big things for my business, versus, wow, this is going to tank my business. When Uber first came around, the conversation was Uber's going to license people to just open doors, and there's going to be no need for realtors. That was like a thing. And that's
I do remember that.
Remember that?
Right. And then that just never materialized.
No, because it's not going to. WebMD is a great example. Like WebMD, if anyone thought that WebMD being around was going to put doctors out of business, is a joke. But for some reason, the real estate community, I think it's because people grow up dreaming about being doctors, but no one grows up being a realtor. Right. So even in their own head, they're not completely sold all the time on if this is the dream or not. But if done the right way, it absolutely can be the dream. Like real estate in general is the most common thread between billionaires. So like successful people, they're involved in real estate. So anyway, I just word vomited, but that whole concept of like, what do you do with this information? Do you see it as an opportunity, or do you see it as what's going to kill you?
Well, yeah. And it goes back to what you talked about, like being cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
I would call it like at least when I think of myself, I am cautiously opportunistic. So I'm not always the most positive person in the world, right? Like I was raised to be kind of more like realistic and pragmatic, and like you just want to see the world for how it is, not through rose-colored glasses. That's how I was raised. But I am opportunistic. Like if I see something, I'm like, wow, I can really see the vision of where this is going. That doesn't mean it's going to go there automatically, but when I can see it, I'm like, oh yeah, like I can get into opportunistic mode. And that's what I see when I hang around top producers and top team leaders, is whether they're super optimistic or super cautious, they're always opportunistic. Like they can see an opportunity and they see a vision for what it could become. And that's what's great about the real estate business, is it requires you to have some vision, because you can create a very low level, extremely frustrating, low paying sales career out of it, or you can become a billionaire. It's like you can really build whatever you want out of it.
Yeah. I mean, cautiously opportunistic tells me that like when Bitcoin came around, you didn't throw your entire savings in, but you didn't say this is never going to last, and you didn't do any research.
Exactly.
You're in the middle there where it's like, okay, world, you're throwing this at me. What do I do with this? Is this going to be an opportunity? Should I at least know about it? Because it's going to affect me. Maybe it's going to be the currency of my kids. So not knowing about it is losing, whether I put money into it or not. Yes. So that attitude, I think, will serve you well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a good litmus test for people to just ask themselves. And it's a good reveal of whether they have a kind of a, what would you call it, a limiting mindset versus an abundant mindset, right?
Scarcity.
Scarcity versus abundance. Because that's I think agents have looked at technology mostly as a threat, which is that scarcity mentality. And if they looked at it with an abundance mentality, they'd be looking for, okay, well, how can I leverage this? And AI is just the latest example of that. 15 years ago, it was lead gen software, it was CRMs and stuff like that. So yeah, it's I think the top producers and top team leaders that I've known, some of them are always on the technology, like the cusp of new technology, because they're insanely opportunistic. They always want to be into the newest, latest, greatest thing. But then there's a whole bunch of others that are behind them going, you know what? I don't need to be the first out of the gate to try that new thing. But hey, if somebody else tries it and it works, I'm on board. Like just show me it works and I'm on board. I'll be the second person in. And I think
that's
that works
where
too.
that third one, so my third point was steal from the best.
Yeah.
And like, I am in a constant mode of stealing from the best. And there's a book called What the Dog Saw. I'm reading this by, you read Gladwell, Malcolm Gladwell? A
little bit, yeah. It's been a while.
So What the Dog Saw, there's this chapter about plagiarism that's just wild. This is off topic, but I got to share this with you. So there's this lady who's wrote in medical journals and done all this stuff around serial killers. She actually is, I believe she's the one who interviewed Ted Bundy.
Okay.
And she, after doing a bunch of these pieces, was told about this Broadway play about serial killers. And she kind of held off because she just didn't want to be around the industry anymore. But all of her friends are like, you got to see this. It's all about like the stuff you deal with. So she goes, and it's eerie. Like halfway through, it's so eerie because it's actually about her life. So whoever wrote this stole all the stuff from her content and made it about her without giving her the credit. Whoa. All right. So that's not what I'm talking about when I say like steal from the best, by the way, like plagiarism. But like what I think is wild, and I was reading that chapter and part of the chapter, like if you read Gladwell, he brings all these different sources to make his point. It's phenomenal. But he talks about the music industry and how like Led Zeppelin, Nirvana stole beat tracks, like bass tracks from these different old like South American bands and all this stuff to create their music, and how that is actually important for the advancement of rock and roll. Like there's it's in the Constitution that you cannot keep something from advancing science to help people. So like there's certain medical limitations where you can't have a patent, because if you have a patent, then it keeps the medicine from growing. It makes people die.
Right.
So, but what I think is crazy is that you could go to a wine and canvas and paint a One Starry Night and not give credit, or you'll give yourself credit and say this is One Starry Night, or paint a Picasso or whatever. And you're not saying this is a Picasso, this is a Matt Johnson original, and you won't get in trouble. You can sell that. But if I play a Nirvana song, like the entire thing, and make it an original Remington Ramsey and try to sell it, you get in trouble for that. So like the rules of plagiarism.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's in the eye of the beholder. Like it's literally whatever society determines. That is way off topic, but anyway, hopefully we can use that for a bit.
Well, I was going to say, it just goes to show, like that there is a million years ago when I went to one of my very first events in real estate. This is like 2014. Do you know what RATE is? Radio and television experts. It's all the people that run TV and radio ads. So it's an association that like manages the ads. So it's usually like just the top one or two agents in any major market in the country. So there's only like 150 people at this event. Anyway, the bunch of them got up and they were sharing how they were able to take listings without actually setting foot in the house. I'm like, well, I've never heard this before. And they was explaining how, I run a lot of radio ads. I basically just have people call into the toll-free line. We tell them come into the office. They're going to meet with me briefly, and then they meet with one of our team. We go through the specifics of the house. And then we basically tell them like, hey, this is our listing process. And at the very end, if you sign, then our next step is to send one of our staff out just to double check the things that you told us about your house, the condition, and just kind of get some pictures and make sure that we're straight. But they sign all the paperwork in the office. Yeah. If you told any agent that, they would swear up and down that is not possible. But it took somebody doing it. And then because they were all talking to each other in that association, more and more people tried it. And they're like, this absolutely works. It absolutely works. Right.
Now, conversely, like it took someone to do that and they probably had 10 other things that didn't work. Like the whole, like what we said about Uber, like that, maybe you could like convince Uber to become a real estate company and they actually train realtors that open doors and that kind of thing, but it didn't. It wasn't worth their time. That wasn't what happened. But I wonder how many other ideas they had, and that was the one that worked. I mean, in my own life, I know like I had all these like unique creative ideas that went nowhere, but Real Producers, the one blew up. And so sometimes as a realtor, like you're not looking to reinvent anything, more so like what is your creative ideas that take off, like hosting an event at a movie theater or whatever. Sometimes it works for some people and doesn't work for other people. Yeah,
that's so true. Yeah, you really do have to like throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and just see what sticks. Because just because it worked for somebody else doesn't mean to work for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't necessarily mean you even did it wrong. It could just be, it just doesn't work with your personality. So you mentioned real estate, or, the Real Producers magazine kind of blowing up in real estate. Let's talk about that for a little bit and we'll finish things off. So tell me a little bit, especially for the people in the audience that may not know, because maybe they haven't been on the cover of the magazine, or maybe they're in their community, but they don't really know kind of all the behind the scenes. Just give us a sense of like, how did it blow up and why did it resonate with the top producers so much?
My background was in closing gifts. It was never in real estate. I was never a realtor. I only sold a couple homes and they were my own. So, but I understood the pain points of being a vendor. And this kind of birthed out of the necessity to sort the real estate agents from the ones that are doing all the business and really good at it, from the ones that may either be new or getting out or part-time. And those are the ones that are frustrating for vendors because they do a couple deals a year and that's not consistent. That's not a good use of my money to call on that realtor. Now, if they decide to go full-time, absolutely. Yeah. But we want to, in the now, be working with the realtors that are the movers and shakers. So long story short, I created the concept in 2014 and teamed up with Into Publishing in 2015 to make the first Real Producers magazine here in Indianapolis. And the reason it blew up is because it was something that was needed from both sides. The realtors, this is non-brand specific, right? So like it goes across all brands. And if you look at local boards, the number one grouping of people that they struggle to get a message to is their top people, because they don't show up to events. They're too busy selling all the stuff. They think they don't know it all and all that. Yep. So this actually was good for them too, because now they're getting their message out to the hardest to reach people, but also the most influential realtors in real estate. Yeah. So then we created the events to kind of seal the deal with the community. And I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why it's successful. I mean, immediately for the agent, it's an ego piece, but it is a validated ego piece, because if you look at what people think we are is broker agent or top agent, which is like, hey, Matt, pay me $2,000. I'll put you on the cover of a magazine and I'll get you a bunch of extra copies so that you can tell people that you're on a cover. But that's quite literally a pay to play model. And the problem is a lot of those agents that do that are actually pretty good. They can afford it, right? But like, it's not really validating their business. It's just paying for the exposure. Whereas Real Producers, 100% nomination based. You can't pay. Not only that, the brokers can't pay for an ad in the magazine, like making it sound like, we're just picking our favorites. Yep. It's literally nomination based. So for that reason, it has been the most the best third party validating process for these top agents.
Yeah,
and that's why
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and then you just briefly touched on the events, but give people an idea of what does that actually mean, and if they have one in their local area, how do they get involved? How do they learn more about the events? Can they just show up if they don't, if they're on the cusp of being a top producer? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, well, the best thing to do if you have no idea what's going on is hop online and go to realproducersmag.com to see if there is one in your area. There's 130 cities that we are in. So chances are, if you're listening to this, we are in a city near you. But there's a distribution list, and the distribution list, this is what's crazy. The distribution list in most of the markets flip over 30 to 40% every single year. In some cases more, which means that
these are the list of top producers at the magazine.
Yeah, the top 500 realtors in Indy
circulates. Yeah,
30 to 40% next year will be new agents, and that's because people move, they retire, they die, they quit, whatever. And there's that many new. 2 out of 3 realtors that train this year will not be here this time next year. So it's the biggest revolving door in all of trade organizations. But that's good for vendors, because that means I will establish my business with top realtors, a handful of those, and there's upcoming new rising stars every single year to help grow that business. But if there's, I will tell you that, selfishly, if there were not in your area and you want us to be, you can connect us with somebody, or maybe you could bring it to that area. So there's a shameless plug for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, so a lot of your, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but there's quite a few area directors that manage the magazine in their area that have a background in real estate. They were an agent at one time. They're still a part-time active agent in some cases, or they're like you and me, where they have, huge connections to real estate, but maybe they're not active at that time.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just realtors. Realtors is a big niche, but like anyone in real estate. So like if you're entitled and you've been in for a while and looking for something new, obviously, closing gift consultants, anything under the sun from real estate. I mean, having that knowledge and speaking the language of realtor really is a benefit for getting going. So yeah, that's who we target.
Cool. Okay. So realproducersmag.com. And then I'll just throw in a quick plug at the end for the podcast, which you host. So you're basically talking every week to people that have appeared on the cover of the magazine. So these are the people that you mentioned that are vetted. They've been nominated by the people in their area as being a top agent. So not only in production, but then also you're covering some of their amazing stories. And so maybe pull out a couple of highlights. The ones that stick out to me are, the gentleman that was shot and paralyzed, and you've got people that have overcome multiple strings of cancer and a bunch of other health ailments thrown in there for good measure, all kinds of things like that. What are some of that stick out to you?
Yeah, man, it's been so cool. I mean, these stories are incredible. And like, if you're having a bad day, for most of us, having a bad day means, someone hung up on us, or, I stubbed my toe out the door. And I don't want to say that all of us having a bad day is trivial, but for the most part, we're usually just being selfish and worried about the negative things that are happening in day to day. But when you listen to this podcast, most of the time you're listening to a realtor who's still doing bananas numbers, 30, 40 million on their own sometimes. And they have overcome incredible trauma to get to that point, most of the time within real estate. So I was a realtor. We had this, I'll just tell you one that hasn't come out yet. We had this realtor in Columbus that was, had already had his story. This is 2019. Had already had his story written. And the day he was supposed to get his photography, he was on his motorcycle and got hit and became a paraplegic in that moment.
Oh my gosh.
But it's 3 years later, he now has use of his arms. He is in a wheelchair, but the dude is the most positive person. He said that just to give you a clip from that interview, he said in that moment, God laid it on his heart to forgive her. In that moment, he's laying on he cannot move. He's on the pavement. There's ambulance sounds and everything like that. And that's what he's thinking about, is the girl whose life is also ruined by hitting him like this. But he's selling real estate and he's crushing it, and he's uplifting like his attitude. So like, you have these stories. We had, I don't want to sound like the podcast is all around tragedy, but we had one agent who grew up during the genocide in Cambodia, and she made it through that, made it to the States. I mean, she was talking about how like when she was a kid, her only toy was rolled up balls of mud that she used as marbles. And now she was like the first president of her board, and super successful realtor. So when you hear these stories, man, it just puts things in perspective of like, what is actually going on in my life right now? What can I overcome? And man, yeah, some really cool stuff. And we also do some other cool ones where, people who have made it big in certain niches of real estate, like mobile home parks or residential assisted living. So really cool show.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So the best place to get it, so Apple Podcasts, you can also get it on Spotify. Spotify works on any device. So whether you're on, like I use it on my iPhone, Spotify works on Android devices too. Stitcher is another good one for Android devices for anyone out there that's listening that way. So Remington, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah, you're the man, Matt.